Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks very much for coming along. I might just leave it another 30 seconds or so to get more people in. We're expecting quite a few more than that. I don't want to kind of repeat myself, but thanks very much for those of you who've come along this evening. Good to see a couple of people who were here at the first webinar as well, so I'm glad you could make it to the second one. Okay, a lot more coming in now. Oh no. Okay, look, I'm going to kick off, and I'm sure other people will join us, and please feel free to leave if you want to. The purpose of this evening is to kind of double down on the first webinar and give you really a bit of response to some of the questions that have been asked, maybe fill in some gaps, and at the end, hopefully I can answer some Q&A if anyone has any subsequent questions. But I'll just try and share the screen now and take you through the beginning of the presentation. And I'm hoping you're able to see that. If anyone can't, please tell me. Good, thank you. All right, so what I want to do today is just a brief recap of the scholarship. But first of all, acknowledgement to Contra. I did this previously. I have my own acknowledgement as well. I acknowledge and pay respect to the past, present and future traditional custodians and elders of this nation, and the continuation of cultural, spiritual and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. I think in the past I've done this acknowledgement, but I have my own version of it, and I think I press on the education component. So tonight is the second part of a two-part webinar series. Obviously, thank you very much. All of you seem to have muted. It does interrupt if you turn your speaker on, microphone on. And what I'm going to do is deal with what are very common, frequently asked questions about the application process and give you a couple of important reminders. I'm also hoping I might be able to give you some tips. Now, there are a lot of questions you may have around the kind of leadership questions and so on that I'll try and answer if I can, but many of them are essentially unique to you. So that's often what we're looking for. A quick recap about the scholarships though. They are for graduates of Australian universities, Australian citizens wishing to study overseas at any institution in 2023. So if you're applying this year, it is for 2023 study only. And that actually, remarkably, is a question we get quite a lot. It's fairly clear, but I do understand why people might ask that question. Most importantly, it's not age specific. So we have quite a few people with us this evening who might be early mid-career. On the other hand, we do have a number of scholars who are fresh out of university, and many whom are, in fact, one of them who is going to be going to Oxford shortly, still hasn't finished his degree. And that does help answer one of the questions, which is, do you have to finish the degree first? So I'm going to move on. And these are, I'm taking them in sort of the quantity order, but also through the application order as well. First of all, how do I indicate that I need to be allocated to video conference panel if I progress to interview? This comes up a great deal because some of you might already be overseas, and good for you if you are. This is put in the first part of the application when you're asked to put an address where you're going to be. After you put your date of birth in, there's an expected address question. Now, if you put in there that you're going to be overseas, then we can allocate you to one of our panels, interview panels, which is held specifically for the purpose of interviewing overseas candidates. Having said that, we do, in some circumstances, at the national level, this is when we've got to the third round of interviews. Someone's asked a question, will the webinar be given information afterwards? Yes, the webinar will be recorded, and I'm afraid to say if the sound is poor, if others of you are having the same problem, do please tell me. Otherwise, it's going to be recorded and it'll be available within a couple of days. So if you're going to be overseas and you get to the national level, there is every likelihood that we will try and assist you in getting to the national panels. We think it's important that at that stage, we do get to meet with you face to face. It's a great experience in and of itself, and we will assist. But the question about putting your location down is answered at that point after your date of birth, your expected address, and we will then allocate you. Next question that comes up a great deal is, should I list a second degree option? Yes, you may nominate a second degree for your field of study. Now, bear in mind, I'm going to touch on this a little bit later. When you're nominating the degree that you think is the very best degree for you to study overseas to enhance your career and then bring something back that will then have a contribution to society. And again, many of our scholars have not yet come back after 20 years overseas. It may be that you're making a contribution in Australia's name when you're overseas, but if there are two potential universities or courses that you particularly want to nominate, yes, you should nominate a second degree option, and there is the opportunity to do that in the application form as well. Third, how do I determine how many years I can apply for? This is a really good question. In fact, I answered someone's email about this this morning. We cover up to 3 years of study. So it may be that you are going to Europe to study a PhD, where quite commonly a PhD might be 4, sometimes 5 years, often the case also in the US. The point here is that we will cover 3 years of that, and it's sort of incumbent on you to consider whether you have the resources to continue on with that study after our 3 years worth of funding and support. And we can assist you with that in many cases. But likewise, if you're studying at a European university, very often they will support you as well. There'll be a stipend or a fellowship and perhaps a fee waiver for PhD scholars. So in most cases, that is often what people will do. But it's important, we'll talk about the budget section in a short while as well. And that's you identifying what will be the cost, the full cost of you completing that program. So for us, it's important to know that our support will ensure that you can complete that program. And it's therefore important that you can demonstrate to us that you've considered what the costs are going to be, not just in terms of the fees, but the additional costs. And that is essentially what our funds are for. And comes to the next question, what is the purpose of the budget and what should I include? Well, the stipend, $75,000 a year, plus a flight to and from the destination of study, is at your disposal, obviously within reason. And so it's for the fees at the university of choice, but also for your living costs, accommodation, and so on. If, for instance, you are going to be undertaking a great deal of field work, and again, there will be alternative sources for that, but if you're going to be doing a lot of field work, if you need to put a lot of travel into that, that is why we want you to very clearly outline what the full costs of your 1, 2 or 3 years will be, and then maybe beyond that in the case of the 4 or 5 year PhDs. Now, a little bit of reality check here, you know, I've got a personal reflection on this. If, for instance, you're going to go and do an MBA at Harvard, I'm afraid to say our stipend won't cover the full fees for that. Likewise, Saïd Business School, our scholars seek out additional funding and very often get it. We have a scholar going to Harvard who's studying the Master of Public Health. Again, the fees are quite high, but he was awarded a Knox Fellowship and so has been able to supplement what he has for additional funding. And we have scholars who apply to Rotary. We've had one of our scholars who applied to their previous college and they've been awarded enough to top up to do an MBA at Oxford. We have another scholar who has gone to the National University of Singapore and been given a Dean's Fellowship, which is a very substantial stipend in addition to ours. So there are opportunities, but we would like to be clear that you can lay that out in a budget. Is it an issue if you're applying for additional funding? No, absolutely not. We have people who have private support, philanthropic support that they've been given. They have support often through their own universities from Australia. We have scholars who receive additional funding when they go to their overseas university. And if you look at the website, there are a couple of universities that we've negotiated very substantial fee waivers for, which make life very easy. In fact, last Friday, I met with the provost of IE Madrid, 5 great faculties. We have a scholar undertaking an MBA there at the moment, had a fee waiver, and they impressed upon me that to live in Madrid, your fees would be fairly reduced, and therefore your stipend would give you a more comfortable living allowance than you might otherwise have if you're going somewhere else. So I think, you know, being progressive and imaginative about where you'd want to go, but also being realistic about how much you can afford is terribly important. And I'd reflect my PhD fieldwork was in India. I got a very generous scholarship from the European Social Research Council. And on the back of that, I didn't live like an expat and have a particularly swish existence, but it meant that I could afford, and this is important in the way you demonstrate the value of this study. I could go to conferences around India. I lived quite comfortably, but, you know, as I say, not in some luxury. But nevertheless, it meant that the networks I could develop, the experience I had and the people that I connected to could be across the country and a couple of times beyond. Because I was able to go to India where the living costs were lower, transport, travel and my field work were not as substantial and expensive they had been in Europe. I'm an Australian citizen, but I also hold dual citizenship elsewhere. Is this an issue? No, it's not. The important component for us is that you have Australian citizenship, that you've studied at an Australian university. And another question that came up, someone recently asked me, does that need to be the undergraduate degree? Obviously, in most cases it is, but actually we have a scholar who came from overseas, is now an Australian citizen, and took masters from an Australian university. So his first postgraduate degree was in Australia, not his first degree. And thereby he was able to apply, and as a scholarship he's studying a PhD now. Next. How should I indicate that I'm still completing a degree? This is in your application. There are actually 4 or 5 different opportunities to put various degrees. Some of our scholars have undertaken 2 or 3 degrees before maybe they move on to PhD. Again, I don't want this to put anyone off. There are a lot of undergraduates still undertaking their first degree who will be applying, and in the group who are here with us tonight. So the important bit is that you put down the degree you are taking, but the transcript up until the most recent transcript you have from your university, indicating that you haven't completed, but that you have the qualification or that you've got the grades that you've got thus far. And so in the final results section, we expect you to put the most recent transcript that you have from your university. Does a transcript need to be verified by a justice of the peace? No. We will hopefully get an electronic transfer that's verifiable from your university transcript, which you can no doubt download. And I would imagine at that stage, you would have had that verified by your department. And if we wanted to verify it, we could do so. What should you put for your final results section? Put your final results in if you've already got your degree. But again, as I've outlined, we're happy to see a recent transcript, most recent transcript you can provide by July the 14th. How many academic degrees am I able to list? I think we actually have the application form allow you to list up to 5 degrees. I think that's probably an unlikely situation that people would do that, but we do, and we have had scholars who have taken 1 or sometimes 2 undergraduate programs, and have sometimes taken 1 and sometimes 2 postgraduate and professional qualifications that they have they've entered. Big question here, and it, you know, I've talked in previous sessions about imposter syndrome. We're not just looking at the medalist from the group of 8 university with a fabulous research record already, okay? And we recognize there's a great difference between someone applying for a PhD or a mid-career health person applying to someone who's just finishing off their undergraduate degree. And we have awarded scholarships to second-class degree scholars who have had a demonstrated degree of excellence in their field, but also components that we're looking for, the leadership, the capacity to give back to the community in volunteering or taking on a challenge or taking on a particular cause that they have demonstrated is important. And that's really the other part that we're looking for. So it's not just about that academic qualification. It's very clearly that we're looking at what other things you can do as well, and what else you can demonstrate. And there's going to be another question I know that comes up about how do you demonstrate that if you've not got a great deal, but I'll come to that later. It's really about the opportunity you might have had and the likelihood that you're going to be able to demonstrate excellence. So your potential, I think I'm talking about there. What should be listed in the professional achievement section? We, again, are not anticipating that everyone will have the most fabulous CV with, you know, a huge amount of professional qualifications. But, you know, demonstrate that something that you have done, that you know, don't need a fancy title, you don't need to be in charge of. I mentioned this at the previous session, but, you know, we will consider all of those other components. And it means you need to tell us, you know, if there's a cause or something that you have taken up and that has met with your professional activities. Having said that, many of you may just be undertaking roles to pay for your fees and get you through university. Those are in a manner a professional qualification, professional achievement, sorry, in that you've managed to sustain yourself through college, perhaps through taking a part-time job or even in some cases full-time work whilst you study part-time. And again, you know, that is demonstrating a commitment to your study that we're also looking for. Can your commitment be, sorry, your CV be longer than 1 page? Look, we ask for 1 to 2 pages, which means that when you submit, you know, if you've got a 15-page CV with all of your publications on it, that you've had a huge amount on, you will have to edit that down. We have a review process, the shortlisting process, which goes out to discipline specialists online, and much though you can put that into the professional section or you can put it into your publication section, I'd imagine a CV of 1 to 2 pages, more a resume, is going to be more useful to people who are looking at, you know, maybe 15 to 20 applications, and each application is seen by 3 or 4 people before we shortlist for the interview stage. What if I haven't got a lot of professional experience yet? It's not a problem. And I'd be loath to think that anybody was considering not putting in an application because they don't have a huge professional body of work or a large professional kind of experience that they can call on. Again, we're looking at the potential, and your potential is against that opportunity you've had. And if you're still at an undergraduate stage, you certainly won't have a great deal of professional experience. And we take that into consideration, both at the shortlisting and at the interview stage. Someone who is mid-career, we would anticipate might have made a greater contribution and had greater experience, but someone who's still in their final undergraduate year. So again, I hope that that's fairly clear, because it's important that we know that you've had experience if you have, but if you haven't had the opportunity, then obviously you can't demonstrate. Postgraduate study proposal. How many degrees you should list? Look, in the application form, there's the chance to put down 2 nominated degrees. But bear in mind, one of the key components we're looking for, one of the key issues we're looking for that I mentioned in the first webinar, is that you are demonstrating to the foundation that this degree that you think is incredibly important that you take overseas is the one thing, or and of course there are 2 or 3 centers of excellence in, many centers of excellence in each of your disciplines, but going to that one place is going to give you the opportunity to come back and do something incredible with that qualification. So you've got to argue a very strong case about why, if there are 2 places that you nominate, why they are both the most outstanding place for you to go to. And I'll be frank, you don't have to have been accepted into any institution before you put in your application. And I would say, again, for some reassurance, we actually have a couple of scholars, even from this year, who, having been awarded a scholarship, have changed the location of their study. They've moved to a different institution. And this could be on the back of the fact that they found a better supervisor. It may be that they realise that their circumstances, perhaps family circumstances, have changed. It may be that the faculty and the work that they've done since they've made the application has changed their understanding and attitude. So it's not like we're pinning you down to whatever it is you put on that application. It is important, though, that you outline why that nominated degree is the important degree for you to do. Okay, so I'm kind of giving a bit of leeway here on the grounds that you go, I think that this particular degree is the one I need. Having said that, if you decide later that you would be better served at another institution, then again, there is the opportunity to do that. So don't feel tied to it. Followed by, how much depth is required for the study proposal? Well, I think, as I've just outlined, it's clear that you've got to say very clearly what it is you're doing, what it is you're doing, why you're doing it, and why that study is going to add a dimension to your experience and networks, as well as the field of study, that will then give something back to Australia, that you will bring back, and you will be changing the way things are done. So in that proposal, in the study proposal, you've got to sort of outline, and there is another component about why you think you're going to be doing it after study. We'll get to that. But in that study proposal, you've got to be really clear, and this is one of the distinguishing features about a candidate who has really thought through what they're going to do and why they're going to do it. But you've got to be very clear in that proposal to tell us why it's important that you're going to do that study. And now, I don't want the entire MPhil for your PhD, but be a degree of clarity, and that demonstrating that you have knowledge and understanding of why that proposal, why that study, that particular course of study is important. It is a distinguishing feature in the applications. James Townsend has asked, if we list 2 degrees, do we have to discuss both in our application? Look, it's worth outlining. I mean, again, there are, of course, several centres around the world are equally excellent. I think the most important bit is the outline why it's important to you, why that would be valuable to you to discuss your application. So yes, you can talk about them, but I think it's important that you outline what it is you're going to be doing with that, which brings me on to the next part. How do I approach it, the trajectory after completing my study? You can refer to both institutions if you want to in this component of the application. There's a short-term aim. Hopefully you develop networks after your study or during your study. You have experiences overseas, networking and meeting other like-minded scholars, perhaps, also working with our scholars who are in the field. But then there's a trajectory, what brings you back? And one of the benefits of our fairly recently launched academy is that we create a platform and a place of professional development for career advice and also for media training and so on. But it's a place that you belong to when you come back. So I put that in there as a tip. It may be that you would like to do a collaborative grant with someone else who is a scholar from 10, 15, 20 years ago. And that would be your first port of call, or that you'll have a particular first career step after you've undertaken this work. It may be that you stay overseas and do further study. It may be that you join a research group. It may be that you join a creative organization in another country from where you're studying before you come back to Australia. So that might be that you've got a first step that you have in mind. And then, of course, we ask you to demonstrate what it is you're going to do when you come back, or even when you're overseas. What are you going to do that's going to improve the community, the field that you're in, the discipline that you're undertaking, such that you'll be able to give back? And that is, for some people, a 20 to 30 year trajectory. That's a whole career mapped out. And again, we've got a number of scholars whose trajectories were laid out very clearly in their application, but their lives have taken completely different paths. They've ended up moving into different fields. The disciplines have changed. We have a scholar from one of our first cohorts who is now a professor at the AI Institute at ANU. I don't think many of us were considering careers in AI 20 years ago. So demonstrably, things will change. But having a sense of what it is you're going to contribute, what it is you're able to give back, is really important. And that can be articulated perhaps very simply. It may be that you have an absolute clear aim for your work and what you're going to do with it thereafter. But it may be that it's slightly more nebulous and that you want to argue a case that when you come back, there are pathways, several pathways, but all of which are going to make a contribution. And I think that's important too. Okay. How should I approach the question about John Monash? Goodness. I think I said in the first webinar, and in fact, all the presentations I've done for universities, I've said that John Monash was an extraordinary man in many ways. There wouldn't be, for us, the vision of what we do to invest effectively in outstanding Australians in all these fields, unless we thought it was going to inspire others and benefit Australia in his name. And I think I said in the webinars I've done previously that, hopefully you'll get to know John Monash and his work a little bit better during the process of application. That in the time you have, maybe, I'm not suggesting you read any of the great fat biographies, but if you have, well done. Just getting an insight into what he contributed, but his ethos, this idea of giving back, that your education isn't just for you, it's for the greater good, is incredibly important. So the golden rule sits there, but I think it's a really difficult question to answer, because we get all sorts of answers to this question, and it could be about how you're inspired, but I don't want everyone just leaning on the idea that, gosh, he was a great chap and so on, but I've purposefully got an excerpt from one of the applications, and it's from one of this year's scholars, and this is what he put in his reflection, or part of his reflection on John Monash. And I thought if I read it to you, it would give you a sense of what we might anticipate. In fact, we liked it so much, it goes in some of our literature at the moment. So John Monash scholars are champions of General Sir John Monash's legacy. There are individuals who strive to replicate his values, and have an equally attuned personal commitment to the improvement of Australian society. To the same extent that John Monash was an ambassador for his country, scholars are given the important task of representing the Australian ideals of dedication, inclusion, and perseverance, both at home and abroad. The leadership qualities of John Monash set an aspirational goal for our scholars to work toward and subsequently inspire in others. And look, I mention that because that is one way of reflecting. You'll have your own unique way of reflecting on the John Monash question. But I think that's a very clear part of one of our scholars from last year who was successful and his response to that. For me, and you know, I'm only fairly recently arrived at the foundation, and just before I arrived, I actually read one of the biographies. What was remarkable, the military career was extraordinary, obviously, but what was remarkable is the amount of work, the incredible influence John Monash had in so many civic endeavours after he came back after the war, setting up the Rotary, establishing a university, the concrete work that he was doing, the electricity service, and so on. So many places that he was able to put his energies into. And the other reflection I have, before we start looking at medalists and the group of 8 universities, 10 years to get his, I should say degrees, plural, but 10 years because of the things that, you know, in his life got in the way of getting his degree immediately. So very clearly someone who was dedicated to education, but, you know, didn't always have the easiest route to it. And I think that might be worth reflecting on as well for some of you. Is there an expectation of how much leadership and volunteering experience I should have? Again, like the professional question, again, it's the case of how much opportunity you might have had in leadership and volunteering. And again, this doesn't need to be that you are head of or in charge of, or you've set up your own NGO. It's simply that you've taken on a cause, something that you believe in, that you think has been important, and that you've demonstrably done something to improve that situation. And again, you know, opportunity for some of you, you know, if you're just at undergraduate level and finishing off a degree, you may not have had as much opportunity as somebody who is in their mid-30s, who's partway through a professional, commercial, legal, healthcare, even arts, cultural career. You may not have had the same opportunities to do that, but we're looking for potential, your opportunity, and you should explicitly say that. If you feel that you haven't had a chance to do that, but you would like to, that you've had some minor influence in that field, talk about it. Tell us what it is you have done. And we are looking for, you know, people have stepped a little bit beyond just turning up and ticking the box for their grades. Those are the other things that we're looking for, and that's why the scholarships are important. To identify those people, sorry, well, the selection procedure is so important. We have to identify the scholars that we think do show those components of their career, their background, that mean that they're worthy of the scholarship. Next. Okay, this is, I've sort of come to the end of this. So the deadline, I will talk about a couple of other elements that I think are important, and then I'll get some questions. The deadline is the 14th of July at midnight. And the reason that's getting a little close is, despite the fact that we're still only in mid-June, it can take a long time to chase down your referees. I know they're going to be busy. We're coming up to a fairly busy time at the university, and I think at the universities, sorry, I should say, and that sometimes your referees may be overseas, they may be conferencing, they may be in the middle of important research work of their own. And so I can't highlight this enough. Please get in touch with your referees as early as possible. Another question that came up, interestingly, from a referee to me the other day was, do the scholars see their references? They don't. You see that they have submitted their references. You won't actually be able to see the references that they've given you. And again, you might want to give them some indication of what's in there and what might be expected of them. So The references ask for their position and background and whether they recommend you for a scholarship, how they know you and what their background might be. And then it asks them about your motivation for education, your ability to analyse and solve problems, their reflections on your leadership, and ethical standards and integrity. So those are scaled, okay? So those are fairly simple for them to answer. But then they are asked to upload a letter in support of you. So they're actually, they're being asked for quite a substantial reflection. And I think it's important that they are able to have time to think and maybe even discuss with you what goes into the application. And I've had a very good from Nadeshda. Thank you for the question. Do the referees have to be Australian citizens? No, they don't. So this could be someone, if you've been studying, for instance, overseas, we've got candidates who are currently overseas at the moment, maybe on a master's program and seeking to do a PhD. We would expect a reflection from their most recent supervisor. And of course, that means they wouldn't necessarily have to be an Australian citizen. Karen has a question here. Would you advise for or against stating that you have previously been accepted at the chosen course in the study proposal but fell short punishment? Not at all, Karen. Look, can I be, this is one of the things I wanted to reflect on. It's a really good question. I'd actually applied for other study before I eventually got to do the PhD that I really wanted to do. And in fact, that probably wasn't a bad thing. It made me think long and hard about what the commitment would be like, what would the commitment be like for my family, what would the commitment be like. Actually went overseas for 3 years, you know, what that would mean for my career. And there are a couple of scholars, potential scholars who, you know, might have to take a fairly significant career break if they're going to go overseas and do a PhD. But I would say the scholarship and the opportunity to do that study will only amplify the work that you might have been doing back here. Secondly, if you've been offered a place somewhere, or maybe you didn't get the offer because you didn't have the financial wherewithal at the time, all the more reason for mentioning the fact. Now we can see that, you know, hopefully with the scholarship, you can do that. Now, again, I mentioned this in the first webinar, and it comes up a couple of times, and it's probably not come up in the FAQs, but we have a scholar this year, one of the scholars this year had applied 3 times for a scholarship and reflected on what it meant to go through the process of the application and what they learned by going through the process of the application. These aren't easy applications, I get it. Neither of the other major scholarships. And I think I should be clear, you wouldn't be able to hold a Fulbright or a Rhodes at the same time as one of our scholarships. But nevertheless, applying for those gives you an incredible insight into what it is you really want to do. And the process of doing our application hopefully gives you the sense that you know, you can clarify and articulate and distill how important it is for you to do this overseas study and what it will mean to you having done so. And that's why, you know, Karen, very good question. That is absolutely fine, and we fully understand there are lots of people potentially sitting in this meeting, in this webinar tonight, who have been in exactly the same position, and I was there too. So I'll finish off with this. The interview dates are on the website. So look, those of you who are applying, take a peek at those. If you're going to be overseas, give us the address you're going to be overseas at, and think about those dates. We do obviously do some of them over Zoom, but this year, all of these interviews after the first shortlisting has been done, that's going to be about 110, 120 candidates will be interviewed state by state, and in each state this year. There are a couple in New South Wales and a couple in Victoria, because obviously the majority of this, a large number of scholars are in those states. And we run a couple of overseas, specialist overseas panels. So again, please look at those dates, think about your availability, or if you're planning something else, think about where you'll be. Having said that, we've interviewed people in hotel rooms whilst they've been overseas. We actually interviewed someone in their lab last year. So they're actually in the lab doing some work as they were conducting the interview. They're hosted in person, and of course this is, I have to put the caveat in there, they're pending COVID-19 restrictions, or for candidates who are currently overseas. Okay, I'm going to get into the Q&A question, but I wanted to emphasize something I mentioned at the last webinar and the ones that I've been to at various universities, and there may be some candidates here from those universities. One is the notion of imposter syndrome. There are a number of you out there, and I've already heard some inklings of it. You've got to be a medalist, you've got to be at a group of 8 university, you've got to be from some particularly elite background. That's not true. It's part of this process. The discipline-based shortlisting, each one of your applications will be seen by a prior scholar among the other people who will be looking at your application, many of whom have come from incredibly diverse backgrounds. And the idea that you're somehow not worthy, I do hear this a couple of times from the scholarship offices from the universities. It's not true. You don't have to have the highest score. You do, as I said earlier, you could have a second-class degree and still be awarded a scholarship. So that's important. Secondly, we put you through the process, the application, shortlisting, the interviews, and then the final interviews, because we really want to identify the people who both are authentic, but can clearly demonstrate and articulate and be able to talk passionately about why they should be doing this. Now, we also know, in the same way that some will have more professional experience because they've had the opportunity, more leadership, or more volunteering experience, we also know that some people are more articulate, are better at describing the work they're doing, that they can, we can often miss, or we previously could miss, the very best scholar because they're not able to elucidate it. But the 3-stage process gives you the opportunity, and our interview process gives you the opportunity to very clearly lay out what's in your stall. Not that you're a fabulous presenter, not that you're fantastic at sitting next to someone at a dining table and chatting away all night long, not that you're necessarily the most sociable person in the room. So again, those components are taken into account when you meet with the interview panels and when we're assessing your work. My next question. Do you have to have completed all of your online application sections before you invite the referees on the system? No, I would send your referees off as soon as possible. You will have to have a complete, 100% complete application form by submission, by the time you submit. That will include, I'm afraid to say, that your referees have submitted their references, 3 of them. That's why I'm saying I think it's really important you get that, start getting that together now. You can only submit once all those referees have come in, and I would hate to, I'd be loath to think that somebody has not been able to get a referee or persuade a referee to put in their reference before the submission date. Separately, what do the references see of your application when they receive the invite? None, actually. I don't believe they get to see your application. They're simply reflecting on the questions that we've given them, and that they will be able to upload a 1 or 2 page letter in your support. So it's really, again, we wouldn't want any kind of influence over that, but I think you want to be choosing the people who know you well enough to give a really solid answer to, or a really solid reflection on what they know about you in the terms I outlined previously. Once you've nominated referees in the application, are they then contacted direct by the scholarship? No, the online form is sent to them. So they will be contacted with by the, it's called Community Force. Those of you who've been in there probably know how incredibly clunky it is, I'm afraid. But that will be sent to them from the application portal rather than from us individually. Unfortunately, I missed the first webinar. Could I please access a recording? Yes, on the website. The webinar is now freely available to anyone who goes onto the website, I hope, because again, I'm not always guaranteed success on that. We had to upload it twice to make it work, but there is that webinar available. And Carrie, are the referees asked 5 questions in addition to one? It's they're asked 4 questions, in fact, which I'll outline them again for you. motivation for higher education, ability to analyse and solve problems, leadership, and ethical standards and integrity. I hope that answers that. And then they're asked to put a letter up as well. Well done. Thanks, Adela, for sending that. I've got my hands full with this at the moment. I didn't have anyone with me today. If for some reason a referee can't complete their reference in time, are we able to resend the online form to another reference? Or does the system limit us to only sending to 3 people? Good point. I could clarify that, but not now. It's a good question that I think I need to put up that on our FAQs online. I would imagine if one of your referees has not submitted, closing to the deadline, I would nominate another referee. Okay, but I will actually put that back up on the FAQs when I've got chapter and verse on it. Do you recommend choosing one personal, one academic, and one professional? Very good question, Carrie. Look, we want the people who know you best. Okay, I mean, inevitably we are looking for academic references from most recently because we're asking for them to reflect on your motivation for academic study, but that could come from a professional background as well. Many of you might be working in research or in policy or development, even in commerce where you're doing research-based work. So it would strike me that having a well-rounded series of referees who are able to provide great reflections on you and for one-page letter, this isn't just tick the box. I'm afraid to say I give references every second day to ex-students of mine. Sometimes they're very simple and straightforward. I tick a few boxes, I grade them effectively and say, would they be, employable, or would they be suitable for the position that they're applying to? And it's left to that. We're asking for someone to, set down on paper a real reflection about you, why they think, and this is an important component for us, of course, it's the due diligence effectively for the foundation. It's someone who can give a decent reflection. There may not be necessarily someone very, very well. I mean, I'm very aware that at university nowadays, the likelihood of interacting even with your course leader or lecturer is sometimes less likely than it used to be. Having said that, I believe you should be able to pick 3 people in your background who can give a good reflection about whether you're suitable and whether they think you have what it takes to be a John Monash scholar. Forgive me. Can permanent residence on the process to obtain citizenship apply to the scholarship? Wow. Important question, because if you have your citizenship when you're applying, which only gives you a very short period left, then you could, but we are very clearly, I'm afraid, for Australian citizens, and that's outlined in our endowment. So I'm afraid to say that's how we parlay that to the criteria. So you should be a citizen, but if you're in the process of obtaining citizenship, if you were to have that citizenship by the 14th of July, which puts an incredible amount of pressure on you, then yes, you would be a citizen, but I would get everything ready and lined up rather than waiting to apply and awaiting that. Secondly, and again, this is a common conversation I have with people. If you're not yet a citizen, there will be opportunities in the future. Come back again when you have your citizenship, and perhaps that demonstrates that you've been committed. And we have a number of people who would reflect that they might have applied a couple of years ago. They were tapped on the shoulder by somebody at university, or they've met a scholar and been really impressed, and just realised they weren't yet ready for that application. Obviously, this is a much more practical dimension to that eligibility, but I think there are a number of people who could say, and this is probably a great thing to put in your application, is to say, look, now's the time. This is my moment. This is when I feel I've built up enough of a head of steam and understand what it is I'm going to do with my my academic or with my career, and now's the time for me to be putting in the application. Okay, Teresa, maybe that's something you want to take offline and have a discussion, because if you're coming close to getting citizenship, then I'd gladly have a discussion with you about if we could get in under the line before the 14th. Do questions for the referee differ based on whether they are nominated as an academic professional person? No, they don't. They get the same template to answer the question, but the opportunities they have to do something slightly distinctive, create something distinctive and unique about you, is in the letter that they'll upload, that they're asked to upload. The question about the leadership qualities of General Sir John Monash. Are we meant to explain why we might be good candidates that reflect those qualities, or describe what they are and why previous recipients won? The phrasing seems like it gives us quite a bit of creative freedom. Excellent jokes. Creative freedom, yes. And do you know what? I don't want you sort of, outlining a tap dance or anything, but be as creative as you can around that question. I mean, the one I read out to you was actually quite creative. It's not about what made other candidates good in the past, although, can I be honest, some of the best research you can do for these applications is to look at a number of our scholars, listen to their podcasts, look at their, any of the material we put in Monash Minds, and how you demonstrate your understanding of John Monash's commitment and where you might chime or resonate with the values that we clearly think are important. Yeah, be as creative as possible in that. It would be interesting, and likewise, we've said in recent months, and I think I've reiterated this in the webinars I've been doing, think progressively about where it is you really want to go and do your further study. Number one, of course, Oxford, Cambridge, Columbia, Stanford, these are the great universities around the world, and they carry a great deal of kudos. Of course, Harvard, we have an awful lot of our scholars have gone to Harvard and Oxford and Cambridge. But thinking progressively and articulating a case of why a university elsewhere might be the most important place for you to study also piques our interest. So, those of you who are thinking of the lesser known European universities, number one, your stipend is going to go a lot further. European universities are actually quite generous. The fees aren't always as much as going to, I think I've mentioned the Harvard MBA isn't covered by our stipend, I'm afraid. So you need to seek additional funding. Likewise, if you go to one of the universities in Europe and maybe even in London, who give us certain amounts of fee waiver, your stipend is going to go a lot further in terms of your, accommodation, living expenses, travel allowance, and so on. And it's at your discretion what happens with that, within reason, obviously. So yeah, be creative both about how you reflect on what General Sir John Monash means to you and how that is articulated into your values and why you're doing this. And likewise, think long and hard about whether you have to have Oxford or Harvard as the institution that you studied at. Now, I get it. I did an exec program at the Kennedy School. It was an incredible program. I went there because there was one particular supervisor there that I was really keen to work with. And of course, demonstrably, it's one of the best institutions in the world. So, I'll argue that case, not that you just want the name after yours at some stage. The networks, likewise, argue the case for the networks of the organizations that you're going to. They are terribly important. But if it should be that the work that you're doing has the best supervisor in the world happens to be at the National University of Singapore, which is the case with one of our scholars this year, then you say that's where the best supervisor in the world is, and we are going to have our interest piqued, because that's a creative way of looking at what you're going to do with your career afterwards. When do we find out if we're successful in progressing to the first stage of the interviews? Right, the interviews are the first interviews are in August. They start toward the end of August, and normally you'll be given 2 weeks notice before. I think the first one's on the 26th of August. So you'll be given a week, 10 days before that, if that were to be the date. That's why I'm asking everyone to look at the on the website. Have a look at the dates, the state dates that you might be relevant for. That gives you an idea when you might need to make yourself available, but you will be given a heads up. In fact, probably earlier than week, 10 days. I think it's nearly 2 weeks that you get advice. It's the process that those applications have got to go through first, the reviewing stage, which is quite elaborate. And then we need to assess those, and there's an audit of those to make sure that they've been done evenly and fairly. So there's an audit process, an external audit process of even the first shortlisting stage to ensure that those are done. And then we give you the notification that you've been nominated for a first round interview. Okay. Now, I'm conscious of time. Anyone got any burning issues they want to ask, put in the chat. I would also like to say, look, thank you for coming along. It's wonderful to see so much enthusiasm. I know that these are incredibly competitive. I wish you all the very best in making an application. And I also want to just, diffuse this idea that it's only for the most elite scholars from the most elite universities. These scholarships are for excellence, demonstrated excellence and potential. So no one should be feeling that they're somehow excluded. Secondly, anything that hasn't been answered today, hopefully will be up on the FAQ, and I'm going to download this chat, and there's going to be one question I think that I need to perhaps just go and get some more reflection on before I deal with it. I'll put that into the FAQ on the site. And lastly, if anybody needs to ask me any questions, if you want to write to me or contact the foundation, please do ring us up. Send me an email. At this stage, there's quite a lot of traffic coming in, I should say, but nevertheless, I will get back to you as soon as I can. Again, can't always answer every question straight away, so it gives me a chance to sometimes go and reflect on those. So I'd be delighted to talk to any of you, and I really wish you the very best. The scholarships are incredible. I think the scholars that I've met thus far, and as I said, I'm fairly new to the organisation, have been remarkable in lots of ways, but not because they're singing or dancing in the best of. They're just remarkable people who've done remarkable work. So it's something you should aspire to. And I think, as I mentioned, we've got one scholar who applied 3 times, didn't find success in those first 2 applications. Please don't be put off by not getting through it the first time round. I know some of you might get other scholarships. You might be applying, and hopefully you are, casting across the field. I'm not competing with any of the other scholarships, but if you don't get through the first time round, come back again if you feel it's appropriate. Because the one thing that doing 3 different application rounds made the scholar who got it was that he eventually was awarded a scholarship. So I think that speaks for resilience and fine-tuning and understanding that whenever your time is right. I do wish we all had more scholarships of this nature to offer to everyone. They are wonderful and enabling and facilitating opportunities for people, life-changing, as some of our scholars describe them. I just wish all of the foundations and scholarship organisations had more to offer. In the meantime, we're kind of wrapping up yet. If anyone has any final comment or any final questions, pop it in the Q&A. No, I hope I've answered all your questions tonight. Look, I go through it as levelly as I can. What I've done is these are a series of questions that have been asked of us, not just this year, but at other times. And there will be other questions out there, not a problem, do ask me, but I've tried to cover off those that I think are the most relevant and the ones we've had most frequently. And yes, there have been some very complex questions as well, people, particularly if they're doing kind of joint degrees or could to tell or whatever. Right, I'll bid you farewell, and thank you so much for attending. And maybe, I'll be at the interview panels, and maybe I'll get to meet some of you further down the line, in which case I look forward to see you there. Okay. Good night, everyone. Have a lovely evening.